of Shakespeare's first folio. Gives you an idea of how big it was. I mean, this is reduced size. This is the actual size of the book. So, you know, when you see these margins, I mean, that's like the edge paper to paper here, okay? So the photographic facsimile is a little bit reduced. But you'll see when you get to the beginning, after all the introduction stuff, talking about how he came up with this facsimile, because it's pretty interesting. You've got the Drosha portrait, where Shakespeare's really not that attractive, right? I mean, this is not Josephine's from Shakespeare in Love, by any means.
It's the biggest forehead I've ever seen.
Pretty big. Like maybe matches Madame Eglintine's. Because remember, hers was a span broad. The span is thumb to little finger.
That's a 6.
Conehead. SNL, 1970s, you know, Conehead. Okay? So you've got that, and then you've got epistle dedicatory, okay? And then it begins with Jonson's Epitaph. And then there are a couple of other things following, and then you see how the poems are arranged and such. This is really a really important work. Hinman's facsimile, because what he did there is he got several copies of the first folio, and he created a machine. It's called the Hinman collator, okay? That he could put a copy here and a copy here, and it had lenses, and it projected an image up here, and he'd look through this view screen kind of thing, and it would superimpose one over the other. And what that enabled him to do was to find immediately on a page all these differences in the typography, how it was printed and such. The reason that's important is all the copies aren't the same. Each one is a little bit different, depending on how much ink was left on the letters. Sometimes a comma doesn't ink, or sometimes after printing a page, it uses the last bit of ink, so there's another copy printed that the comma doesn't show up, okay? Or a letter might shift in place. All kinds of things. Or between printing one page and printing another, somebody issues a correction. That is, you've got somebody else over here proofreading, because they don't necessarily proofread, get it perfect, and then start printing, because, you know, time's money. So they start printing off copies and proofread and make corrections on the fly. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of different variations in the first folio. Okay, back to where we left off, whatever day it was, last Thursday. Ben Jonson's Epitaph. This is on 907. So, Jonson says, he talks about, you know, you art a monument without a tomb and art still alive while thy book doth live, etc. We have wits to read and praise to give. And I think we left off essentially there. So he says, that I not mix thee, so my brain excuses, I mean with great but disproportioned muses. Well, who are the great but disproportioned muses? They're the characters he's just mentioned previously, and those he is going to mention. Okay? So, his disproportioned muses, Chaucer, Spenser, Beaumont, and following, Kyd, Marlowe, etc. Okay? How are they disproportioned? He means in proportion to you. They don't compare. Chaucer, Beaumont, and Spenser, they don't compare to you. Kyd, Marlowe. Now, Chaucer is not a dramatist. It's not really a fair comparison. Okay? Spenser wasn't a dramatist. It's not a fair comparison. Fletcher was Beaumont was a dramatist. In fact, we think Shakespeare actually helped Beaumont on one of his plays. Okay? So he says, I'm not going to mix you. I'm not going to include you in this room with them. So he goes on. For if I thought my judgment were of years, okay, what did he already say? Soul of an age. If my judgment was only for a few years, he says, I should commit thee surely with thy peers. Who are his peers? Okay, peer has the British aristocratic sense, social status equals, but it also has literary status equals. So who are his peers? And tell how far thou didst our Lily outshine. Lily, John Lilly, who wrote a book called Euphues, or The Golden Legacy, which is kind of a novel in which he creates his own style of writing. It's called euphuistic style. Heavily ornate. You might hear the phrase, you might have heard the phrase, you might have received it on a paper. Purple prose. Anybody know what that means? It's highly florid, it's highly detailed, highly descriptive. Going over and above, in other words. Okay? Well, that kind of describes Lily. Lily was a contemporary of Shakespeare's. Okay? Who else? Or Sporting Kid, Thomas Kidd. Another dramatist. His writing's coming to an end as Shakespeare's is really just taking off. Kidd wrote the Spanish tragedy, okay, which kind of starts the whole revenge tragedy tradition in England, which, Hamlet is part of. Or Marlowe's mighty line. And if you saw Anonymous, Marlowe is proposed there as possibly being the real person behind Shakespeare's plays. Not like the influence, but the author of them. Only problem is, Marlowe died long before most of Shakespeare's plays, at least were performed. If you buy the Anonymous line, he secretly had them all written in there, just kind of dribbling them out over the years. Okay? From thence to honor thee, I would not seek for names. From thence, that is, from these guys. No. Who would I compare you with? Thundering Aeschylus, Euripides, and Sophocles. Okay? Those are the three great Greek tragic writers. Pacuvius, Accius, him of Cordova dead. We got footnotes for these guys. To life again, to hear thy buskin tread. Okay? The buskin is the flag that indicates tragedy is playing. So in the Globe, if a tragedy was being portrayed, they would have a flag run up a flagpole. And the flag would have an image of a buskin. Okay? If a comedy was being played, flag would be run up, that would have an image of a sock. Because a sock was the symbol for comedy. Okay? Or when thy socks were on, leave thee alone for the comparison of all that insolent Greece or haughty Rome sent forth or since did from their ashes come. Okay? So, if I were going to compare you for your tragedies or your comedies, these are the ones I'd look to. Triumph, my Britain. Thou hast one to show, to whom all scenes of Europe homage owe. What's he mean by that? Thou hast one to show, to whom all scenes of Europe homage owe. Anybody who has portrayed Europe, Jonson is saying, they owe homage to you. That is, even if they did it long before you, Shakespeare. Homage, they've got to bow down before you and say, you're the master. Whether that scene of Europe is France, Henry V opens up with a person coming out and delivering the prologue and says, imagine this round O is the field of Agincourt. And he puts us in 1415 France, the battlefield. Okay? He was not of an age, but for all time. But he started by saying soul of an age. Now he's done what? He's taken that idea of the sphere, and he's done what? Shakespeare is the soul of what? All time. All literary time. Put it that way. One of the quote unquote, and I kind of use that facetiously, greatest critics of the 20th century, still alive. I hate it when that happens. And as soon as I think of his name, it poof. He's edited a whole big long series of books. 20th century interpretations of, name your author, 20th century author. Oh, geez, what is his name? He's got hundreds probably of books to his name as editor. Hundreds, if not thousands of articles. Anyways, he wrote a book about Shakespeare, essentially saying Shakespeare is the center of all literature. All. Greek, Roman, Italian, French, German, Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, South Korean, North America, whatever. Everything either points to Shakespeare or everything comes out of Shakespeare. Not Morton Bloomfield. I think it's gone. It'll probably come back when I'm eating dinner or something. So, he was not of an age before all time, and all the muses still were in their prime, when like Apollo he came forth to warm our ears, or like a Mercury to charm. Notice, the muses were still in their prime. What does that what does that modifier still imply?
Long ago.
And what verb comes before it? Were. Now?
Long ago.
Yeah, they're not in their prime now. So if they're not in their prime, what does that mean? They're kind of hobbling along. The muses have lost their power. What's the purpose of a muse?
To inspire.
To inspire. To give poetic inspiration. Nature herself was proud of his designs, enjoyed to wear the dressing of his lines. Which is kind of interesting that Jonson says that, because how much does Shakespeare really, if you've had a course in Shakespeare, how much does Shakespeare really describe nature? I mean, the natural world. He doesn't a whole lot. What's he describe? Us. Wordsworth describes the natural world. Coleridge describes the natural world. They're out walking among the trees and flowers and picking, stuff. Okay? What's Shakespeare seemingly doing? He's the one sitting, darken the lights in this room, put a bar up here, lots of drinks. He'd be sitting where Michaela's sitting. Back corner, doing what? Throwing back drinks? Maybe.
But watching
people. He's observing. He's noticing the different kinds of characteristics people are exhibiting. You got your loudy, riotous, drunk over here. You got the lovers over in the corner. All different kinds of people. Why? Because they show up in all of his plays. Okay? So, joy to wear the dressing of his lines, which were so richly spun and woven so fit, as since she will vouchsafe no other wit. Since Shakespeare, Jonson is saying, nature, personified as a goddess, will not do what? And I think this is Jonson, the dramatist, saying this, as well as Jonson, the poet. Come on, nature, give me some inspiration. Help me describe. Because Jonson wrote poetry about nature. He described a house, Sir Philip Sidney's house. The house and the gardens around it. Okay? And he's kind of saying, but it's wooden poetry. It's just kind of stilted. I don't have Shakespeare's ability. The merry Greek, tart Aristophanes, author of Clouds and Frogs and things like that. Neat Terence, witty Plautus, couple of Romans. Now, not pleased. That is, we don't like their stuff now. Okay, Jonson's writing this 1623. You can see some plays by Aristophanes still today. Clouds, for example, is often, maybe not often. It's performed every now and then. You could probably see it, pretty good chance you'll see it during the summer in England. Okay? Why? Because there's a lot of great humor in there. He's poking fun at Socrates, as having his head in the clouds and stuff. Lysistrata, another one, women withholding sex from their husbands. Why? Because they won't quit going off and fighting the Spartans. If you guys don't quit that fighting, you're never going to have sex again. They're like, okay. So that's another one that's frequently performed. He says, now they don't please. Well, why does he mean now? Well, once you had a taste of Shakespeare, you don't really want Terence or Plautus anymore, or Aristophanes. But antiquated and deserted lie as they were not of nature's family. He's drawing a distinction between what's natural and what's artificial. Artificial just means what? Made by human hands. Natural, made by nature. Okay. And it's not artificial in the sense of, like this is genuine artificial leather. He means artificial is not entirely negative or pejorative here. Okay? But he's kind of implying it just doesn't have that natural beauty that Shakespeare's did. Yet must I not give nature all? In other words, he's kind of saying this. No, it's not all nature. How many of you, if I were to pull these out and just start reading from one, okay, those little verbal reactions I just heard told me something. What did they tell me? I shouldn't do that. Why not? We're scared. Because none of you think you're a natural writer. That is, how many of you had this experience? This was the experience Samuel Jonson had when he wrote. 18th century. This is 3010, take 3020. Okay? Dr. Neth or somebody. Yeah, take Neth. You want to work hard, but you want to learn, man. Neth's a genius. Okay? I mean that literally. Neth's a genius. Samuel Jonson, and Milton did this too in Paradise Lost. Just absolutely disgusting. One draft.
Dear God.
Most of Samuel Johnson's stuff, one draft. Milton composed Paradise Lost up here and dictated it to his daughters because he was blind. Okay? I hate people like that. That's natural. That's inspiration. What's Jonson getting at? Okay, notice what he says. Yet must I not give nature all, stopping the idea, he's now going to turn. Thy art, my gentle Shakespeare, must enjoy a part. Thy art, this. But what is this really? Your human hands. Writing this paper was what? Work. And it wasn't easy work, probably. It wasn't hard work like you're out there breaking stones, digging ditches, but it was. Maybe it wasn't. For me, it always was. Digging ditches up here, because this isn't very fertile. Hard, dry, concrete ground, Too much TV in my early years. Trivia Pursuit, you don't want to play against me if it's 60s, 70s, I'll wipe up the floor with you. Okay? So, my gentle Shakespeare must enjoy a part. For though the poet's matter nature be the matter. When Hamlet says, when Polonius says to Hamlet, Hamlet's walking around, he's got his little book. He says, what's the matter, my lord? And Hamlet says, with what? He goes, no. The matter. What is it you read? Okay. What's the poet's matter? Nature. Well, what does he mean by nature there? Everything. Because we're part of nature. We don't like to think we are. We think nature is Mother Nature, tornadoes. Nature's out to get us. We're out to get us, more to worry about from people than you do from storms. So, though the poet's matter nature be, his art doth give the fashion. What's the fashion? The clothing. His art, his human hands, his work dresses nature. How? In lines, in poetry, in description. Who cast, his art doth give the fashion, and that he who casts to write a living line must sweat. Who casts? Now it's almost like it's a fishing metaphor. A living line, okay? You're throwing a line out to do what? Catch a fish. So what do? He must sweat, such as thine are. What is such as thine are? Sweat? What? No, his lines. Shakespeare's lines are what, Jonson says? Alive. They're not dead. They're not merely cold black marks on a page. If we have wit and eyes to see, wit, intelligence, he must do what? Strike the second heat upon the muse's anvil. What's the second heat? Second draft. Revise. Now, some people take this as Jonson, the contemporary of Shakespeare, and possibly friend, okay, as Jonson informing us a little bit about Shakespeare's creative activity. That he knew for a fact Shakespeare wasn't one of those writers who just sat up there in his garret and wrote his sonnets, one draft, no corrections, no scratching out, no blotting of ink, just perfect. It'd be nice to think that he did it that way or that he did it the way Jonson says. What's the problem? We have no surviving evidence. We have none of the sonnets written in Shakespeare's own handwriting. None. None. We have none of the poems written in Shakespeare's own handwriting. We have some drafts of plays that have Shakespeare's handwriting in them because we know where he helped writers. I mean, there are some plays, for example, National Shakespeare Festival is going to put on Pericles this summer. Shakespeare didn't write all of Pericles. I think he's responsible for something like most of 2 acts of a 5-act play. So he wrote not quite half. There are some manuscripts where we can see lines written through in Shakespeare's handwriting up above. We know it's Shakespeare's handwriting because we can compare it with his will. And handwriting can be dated and compared pretty easily that way in the Renaissance, okay? Maybe Jonson is telling us something about his practice. So, you must strike the second heat upon the muse's anvil, turn the same, and himself with it, that he thinks to frame. Or, for the laurel, for there means instead of. Instead of the laurel, he may gain a scorn. I'm going to ask this rhetorically. Do not answer it. Obviously, that's what rhetorical means. How many of you finished this paper? Finished. Finished. First draft. 6 hours ago. 10 hours ago. 2 hours ago. Okay? What's Jonson saying there? You want the laurel? What's the laurel in the modern American higher education grading system? A, A, crown on the top. Not more there, it's A, conquers all, right? That's probably, I'm not saying it can't, it's probably not coming from a paper that was started at 10:30 last night and finished at 4:30 in the morning. Odds are pretty good. I have no way of knowing. Now, if I had you submit electronic copies, yeah, I could find that out real easy. Just go to the get info information and it would tell me when it was begun and finished. Okay? I just saw some eyes go, what? I gotta delete that information. Or whose initials are these? Because these aren't B.A. Brennan, no, this is, So, or for the laurel he may gain a scorn. Why? A good poet's made as well as born. Jonson just said two things. A good poet is born. Or a good poet may be born. But what else? You can make yourself into a good poet. How? Beat that anvil, man. What? Just keep trying. Keep working at it. Keep working. Revise, 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 revise. Now, is that always true? No, it's not. It's true for Jonson. Why? Anybody know anything about Jonson? His background? What does father do? He was a bricklayer. Where's a bricklayer on the social stratus?
Pretty low.
Yeah, he's down here. Right? But his father did well enough as a bricklayer that he got Jonson into just about the best school in London, the Westminster School. And Jonson really applied himself so that, I completely missed that line. I completely skipped over it. So that when Jonson talks about Shakespeare, line 31, and though thou had small Latin and less Greek, okay, what Jonson's doing there is he's saying Shakespeare had small Latin, that is a little bit of Latin, and even less Greek, compared to me, Ben Jonson. Well, Ben Jonson in the early 17th century was regarded as one of the greatest classicists there was. So that'd be like, Stephen Hawking saying to, Brennan, though he had small physics and less astronomy, what compared to Stephen Hawking, who had lots of physics and astronomy. Okay? It's not a fair comparison. That, by the way, that line about the small Latin and less Greek, the anti-Stratfordians, they sink a whole lot of their ammo into that because whoever wrote the plays had to have pretty good knowledge of Latin and Greek. A couple of the sources are only available in Latin. A couple of the sources, one of the sources behind A Midsummer Night's Dream, only available in French. So whoever read that, Midsummer Night's Dream, As You Like It. One of those two. Only available in French. So whoever wrote the plays had to know French. Guy was a country bumpkin from Warwickshire. How did he learn French? If he had an education, he had at best a 6th grade education. Yeah, but I've said this before. 6th grade education in Shakespeare's day, in terms of Latin and Greek, is the equivalent today to a 4-year college degree from like Sewanee in classics. Why Swanee? Because they have a degree in classics. I don't choose MTSU because we don't. You can't major in classics here. You can take a course or some courses in Latin, but you can't take language and then a whole bunch of authors in Latin like you can at Swanee. Okay? Go back to where we were. Good poets made as well as born. Made means what? You have to have at least what? You got to have the aptitude. You got to have the ability. LeBron James wasn't born, quote unquote, LeBron James. What do I mean by that? He wasn't born with a basketball in his hand, right? Tiger Woods. I don't usually use sports metaphors because I don't care for them. Tiger Woods just came back. 14 years, 19 years of no major wins, I think it was.
14.
And he wins the Masters.
11, 14.
Okay. Well, he wasn't born with a golf club in his hand. His father put one in his hand very, very early. Like the Williams sisters, their father put, tennis rackets in their hands very, very early. Why? To make them become what they were. Implication is, Shakespeare started writing probably early, long before he arrived in London. Maybe during those missing 7 years, 1585, 1592, what are called the lost years. His last child's born in 1585, birth certificate has Shakespeare's name on it, and then Shakespeare drops off the face of the world. We hear nothing about him for 7 years. When we first hear about him next, he's mentioned in Green's Groat's Worth of Wit. And Green is really angry because this guy is stealing his thunder. And he's already having plays produced. If he's already having plays produced in 1592, what's that mean? He already wrote them. So he's been around in London for a couple of years. His wife and kids are back in Stratford. They're always back in Stratford. As far as we know, he lives in London 1590 to about 1611, 1612. And as far as we know, he never goes back and visits during that entire period. We don't know that he doesn't. We have no proof that says he does. We have no proof that says he doesn't. Okay? So a lot of people want to, extrapolate, he had multiple lovers in London. Maybe. Don't know. No proof either way. So, good poets made as well as born, and such wert thou. You worked at it, Shakespeare. Yeah, you were born to be a writer. Nature looked down favorably on you, but you also worked at it. Look how the Father's face lives in his issue. It's almost like he's been reading Shakespeare's sonnets, right? The first 20 of them. Don't die without reproducing. Well, he did, both in this stuff and his kids. There are no living heirs, by the way, of Shakespeare alive today. His family died out in the 17th century. By 1700. Nobody today can say, I'm a living descendant of Shakespeare. Nobody can say that, by the way, for John Donne, Edmund Spenser, John Milton. See a pattern? All these greats, it's like they spend all their quote-unquote genes in this. Okay? So, look how the Father's face lives in his issue. Even so, the race of Shakespeare's mind and manners brightly shines in his well-turned and true-filed lines. Well-turned, true-filed are both terms that Jonson's probably familiar with from the kind of people I imagine his dad hung around with. His dad was a laborer. He was a skilled laborer, however. Okay? Bricklaying, masonry, that's a skilled craft. The kind of terms he uses there, well-turned, true-filed, have reference to woodworking, turning on a lathe. Okay? True-filed, probably a reference to metalworking, like filing, sharpening a saw or knife or sword. Yes?
It's not proof that Shakespeare had lovers in London? if he did, possibly he could have had children with them.
Yeah.
So there could.
Yeah, I mean, there could be illegitimate children, obviously. Sure. We know where he lived. All the places he lived in no longer survive. All those houses, buildings, etc., were destroyed. But we know where he lived. We know he partially owned one of the buildings he lived in. I mean, Shakespeare was not your, it's all about the art. I mean, the guy was in it for the money. He was buying up land, buying up property, selling stock, buying stock, getting involved in lawsuits, over purchases of buildings, etc. You can go to London. I got a great map. I did it a couple of years ago. You can go to London and you can walk, all the areas Shakespeare lived and, look at the places where he lived, even though they're not the same buildings. I take that back. I think there is one building down right in the city center where the building actually does survive because it was outside the reach of the Great Fire of London in 1666. But yeah, I mean, because there's very little reference to Shakespeare, okay? In each of which, talking about his lines, in his well-turned and true-filed lines, in each of which he seems to shake a lance. Notice the little pun there. As brandished at the eyes of ignorance, sweet swan of Avon. Now, some have taken those lines to be kind of code. Maybe that's Jonson saying that the Shakespeare from Avon wasn't really. I don't know how you get that, because to me it seems exactly the opposite. Okay? To shake a lance as brandished at the eyes of ignorance, that is, those who don't think he was, because the implication by some of the anti-Stratfordians is that people in Shakespeare's day even knew. He didn't write this stuff. It was kind of like an open secret. Well, if it was such an open secret, you would think there would be more proof of it today surviving, but there's not. Sweet swan of Avon, what a sight it were to see thee in our waters yet appear, and make those flights upon the banks of Thames that so did take Eliza and our gems. Okay, because it rhymes. But stay, I see thee in the hemisphere. Wait, what's the water he's talking about? Well, the Thames, obviously. But why does he say, we would like to see you still in the water? Because he referred to Shakespeare as what? The sweet swan of Avon. So we would like to see you swimming in the river. And then he says, but wait, I see you in the sky. Why? What's he just done to Shakespeare? Remember how to spell it. Apotheosis. This is apotheosis. He's just divinized Shakespeare. He's raised him to the level of a god. For what purpose? So that Shakespeare can now become a muse. But stay, I see thee in the hemisphere advanced and made a constellation there. Shine forth, thou star of poets. So when you call a star to shine forth, what are you asking for that star to do? Shine on me. Okay? Give me light. As the psalmist says, be a lamp unto my feet. Give me a path to follow. Shine forth, thou star of poets, and with rage or influence, chide or cheer the drooping stage. Do you really want to be an actor on a stage that's drooping? The floorboards are caving in, the roof's falling down around you. Because what does that imply? Why is the stage drooping? Because the plays suck. That's why. They aren't any good. It's drooping. It's losing its force. Which, the drooping stage, which, since thy flight from hence, okay, you, the flight, so the swan that left, that died, hath mourned like night. Okay, when was that? Is it 1616 when Shakespeare died? Or is it 1611 when Shakespeare leaves London? Because we do know fairly soon after Shakespeare leaves, because we have records. It's in the Stationer's Register. We have records of what plays are produced and performed and such. And in anecdotal evidence, people's diaries, etc., journals. We know what plays are performed in all these years, from going back to 1590 up to, early, mid-1620s. And once Shakespeare leaves London, you start to see his plays performed less. Why? Other playwrights have come in. Doesn't mean they're better playwrights. It's just Shakespeare's not there. He's no longer writing. Bear in mind, when Shakespeare's writing his plays, who's performing them? His acting company. The acting company that he has an ownership stake in. Okay? I mean, there are the king's men, yes. The king doesn't get money from them. What kingsmen means is the king is their patron. Don't touch them. That gives them protection. Okay? But Shakespeare owns stock in the company. Literally. Stock. Private ownership. All right? So what does that mean? A percentage of every ticket sale was his. So what's his purpose in writing the plays?
Bigger percentage of the tickets.
If I write blockbusters, I get the money. Does that mean he doesn't have any attention for artistic or aesthetic integrity? No, obviously not. I mean, all you have to do is read the plays, and we're still reading them. Hell of a lot of plays written in the Renaissance. The only people who read them, people writing doctoral dissertations. Why? Because nobody else has written about them. Why? Because nobody else reads them. Why? Because they're no good. You go on to graduate school, you want to find something to write a doctoral dissertation on, write about something that nobody else has written about. Now you're going to have to justify why it merits that, and you can't say, well, because it's so bad, nobody else has written about it. You got to come up with a better reason for that. No. It's malign because the person, has 3 legs or something. I don't know what you come up with some reason why it's not appropriate. So, which since thy flight from here, the drooping stage hath mourned like night, and despairs day, but for thy volume's light. Mourned like night, how? Plays weren't performed at night. Plays were performed during the daytime. Shut down at night. Why? Kind of hard to keep it lit. I mean, yeah, you can have the stage lit, and you can have, the galleries and everything lit. What's a big problem, though, in 1620 or 1623? Globe already burned down once. 1613, performance of Henry VIII. Cannon fire. Had a blank, but what do you put down the cannon when you fire a blank? It still has wadding, and the wadding landed on the thatched roof, burned it to the ground. That's the last time there was a Globe Theater until 1995, when Sam Wanamaker, American businessman, actor, producer, etc., rebuilt the Globe. Okay? In despair's day, but for thy volume's light. What's thy volume? It's that. What's he saying? This book, this will what? This will revive the stage. Now, were Shakespeare's plays not available before then? Yes, they were. They weren't available in a single collected edition. And one of the reasons it's thought that it took 7 years, from his death until then was because the people who were producing it and the printer who was putting it together, they had to buy the rights to several of the copies of the plays. That is, people who had published an individual copy of a play earlier still owned rights to it, like copyright. And they had to either wait till that expired or buy the rights from that printer to print it themselves. A couple plays aren't in there. I don't remember which ones. I think there's like 35 in there. I can't remember which ones. Okay? But it took a while to get those rights, and it took a while for those rights to expire in order to do that. Okay? So now he's suggesting, now maybe the stage will grow back again. And yet, within 20 plus years, they all get closed down by the Puritans. They just close all the theaters down during the interregnum, 1649, 1660. But when 1660 comes back and the Restoration comes back, Katie bar the door. I mean, you've got plays galore. And if some people thought some of Shakespeare's plays were dirty, woo! Read some of those Restoration plays. Risque, not out and out dirty. But oh, the innuendo. You have to be blind, pretty much, not to see it. Okay, with not nearly enough time. Let's go on to John Donne. Donne, another contemporary. Okay, Shakespeare born 1564. I don't remember. Jonson born 1572. Donne was born 1572. Okay, so they're 8 years younger than Shakespeare. Donne dies 1631. Jonson, I just had him. Jonson 1637. Shakespeare we already talked about 1616. Okay. Jonson intellectual 1616. So before he even writes this, the Epitaph, Jonson publishes a book titled The Works of Benjamin Jonson. And what he means by works is my literary output. He was the first person. This is Shakespeare. This is Jonson. This is Donne. Jonson was the first person to, in print, refer to writing as work. I don't know about you, but I kind of imagine he goes home for Thanksgiving and he sits with his father, whose hands are hardened and calloused from laying brick. I laid brick for about 2 months and screwed up my arms, carpal tunnel. That's why I had surgery last fall. It's really, really, really hard work. And his dad probably went, "Really, son? Work? Oh, you got a pinprick from sharpening that quill there? Poor boy, Oh, you got ink stains. I'm sorry." I doubt that his father considered that really work. Anyways, he called it work. Okay? And it was, for him, hard. He and Donne, about the same age. He dies a few years after Donne. We know Jonson and Donne were friends. Okay? We have a book called Conversations, and it's written by a guy named William Drummond, who is a Scot. And it's conversations that he has with Jonson and others. And in one of those conversations, Jonson tells Drummond what he thinks of Donne as a writer. He says a couple of things. Donne, for not keeping of accent, deserved hanging. Hanging. What does he mean, not keeping of accent? Iambic pentameter. Donne doesn't write in iambic pentameter. He turns the whole thing on its head. Sometimes he does, often he doesn't. He also said Donne, because of his naughty syntax, Knotty, meaning difficult, convoluted, would not be read outside this century. That is the 1600s. Whole lot more people read John Donne today, or write about John Donne today, than they do about Ben Jonson. Why? Because Donne's interesting. Jonson's not. Jonson's kind of boring. Donne, you could read one of the greatest works of quote unquote divine devotional poetry about the soul's love for God, and turn the page and be reading, the most extreme innuendo about sex. It's like, how does this work? And sometimes you get a mashup of the two, where the soul's love for God is like sex. Okay? So, Donne, a little bit of background. And the only reason I'm doing this, my dissertation was on Donne. It was an edition of the Holy Sonnets. Fought in Spanish wars against the Spaniards. Raised Catholic, family old line of Catholics. Okay? Brother and uncle persecuted for their Catholicism. One of them imprisoned. Leaves his Catholicism sometime probably in the 1590s. We're not exactly sure when. 1601, marries Anne More. Turn to your introduction real briefly. I don't have time for this, but in 1598, he becomes secretary to a guy named Lord Egerton, okay, who is the keeper of the seal, Privy Seal. So whenever Elizabeth needs to have a document sealed, Egerton's the one who is, metaphorically at least responsible, the keeper of it. So by being secretary to this guy, Donne is really rising in social circles and status and power even. Okay? He becomes this without ever having attained a university degree. We think he never attained a university degree because you had to swear to the oath of supremacy that the Anglican Church was the one true church. Donne was raised Catholic. A good Catholic couldn't do that. Okay? You couldn't get a degree without doing it. So he probably didn't go to university for that. Anyway, in 1598, he becomes secretary to Lord Egerton. Anne More, okay, is Egerton's niece and lives with him. And your book gives, where is it? 1601, he marries her. She's 17. 3 years earlier, she's 14. 1598, he is what? He's 26. Ew, what would we call? What would a whole lot of people call that today? I wouldn't. Pedophilia. Can anybody say the word? Or can you spell it in British fashion? Okay. Paedo. Okay. So they meet. They get married in 1601. Okay. When Donne is now 29, she's 17.
Oh, that's better.
Okay. Exactly. That's why I said I wouldn't call this pedophilia, because this was the cultural norm at the time. Now, 21st century, anytime you put an attitude from one period onto another period, you're going to have all kinds of anomalies. Right? So they get married, and hell breaks loose. Because the marriage is kept secret for 3 months. And then it gets outed. We don't know how. But when it is made known that he has married Anne More, her father, Sir George More, has Donne thrown in prison. He loses his job. This is a cushy job. Secretary to Lord Egerton is like an equivalent. would be something like executive assistant to the vice president. That, you get a ride Air Force Two. I mean, it's pretty cushy, okay? So Donne gets thrown in prison. His wife's pregnant, by the way, okay? All the letters that Sir George Moore wrote to John Donne while he was in prison, and that John Donne wrote back to him, are currently at the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C. There's like 40 of them. Okay? And it's not just while he was in prison, it's afterwards also. They developed a more positive relationship, let's put it that way. They got along afterwards, okay? But when he gets fired and gets thrown in prison, everything shuts down. All avenues for him, doors, okay? So he starts making a living, no longer as a secretary, he starts making a living through writing. He writes poems for people. You want me to write a wonderful poem about your birthday? Sure, $50. It's called the patronage system. Well, he was still widely regarded. I mean, I said Jonson, was the greatest classicist. Yeah, but if you want one of the wittiest poems, that is the kind of poem you got to sit there and go, does that mean what I think it means? Does that? Well, or does it mean that? Or you want Donne. Okay? He had a way with words, let's put it that way. Okay? He had an encyclopedic knowledge also. So they get married, start having kids, and they keep having kids. She dies in 1617. So she's 14 then. So 17 and 2 is 19. She dies when she's 33. She dies after childbirth. Her 12th child. And I think it's 3 or 4 of their children die are either delivered stillborn or die in infancy. And none of Donne's heirs survive after, if I remember the date correctly, after about 1700. Okay. So, little bit more. About 1608 or so, he apparently has some kind of religious crisis. And probably at around that point starts to becomes Protestant. Okay? About 1610, 1609, he starts writing anti-Catholic stuff. Okay, now remember, he had a brother who got sick while in prison and died from that sickness while in prison. He was in prison because he was Catholic. It became a capital crime in Elizabethan England to be Catholic and in England. That is, to be a Catholic. If you were caught being a Catholic, that was cause for death. Just that. Okay? Spanish Armada kind of riled people up a little bit. So, he starts writing stuff. For example, he writes a pamphlet called St. Ignatius, His Conclave. The St. Ignatius that is referred to as St. Ignatius Loyola, founder of the Jesuits. His conclave is his circle in hell. Yeah, it's pretty. Okay? Now, James becomes king in 1603, right? James has taken a liking to Donne. And he kind of puts the word out. John Donne doesn't get any jobs. John Donne doesn't get any preferment. I have something in mind for him. He wants Donne to become a priest. Not Catholic, Anglican. Right? And so he kind of puts the kibosh on all the possibilities for Donne. So Donne, he does later on go to work as secretary for another guy, Sir Robert Drury. But in 1615, Donne takes holy orders. He becomes an Anglican priest. Okay? And about that time, he writes a letter to a friend and says, I'm getting ready to take holy orders, and I need to make a break from the past. That is, I need to show that the kind of poetry I used to write, I'm not going to be writing it anymore. Can you loan me that little book I loaned you? Because he's going to publish his previous poetry. So when he asked for that little book, that's Donne probably telling us, I don't have any copies of my own poems. Do you still have that book I loaned you? Which probably was a manuscript copy of Donne's poems in his own handwriting. If you found that today, if you were to discover that in a university or private collection library, and it were authenticated by Peter Beale or Gary Stringer or half a dozen other people, I could list the names from when I worked on the Donne Variorum, you could almost name your position in a Department of English anywhere in the world. Because we have one poem that survives in Donne's own handwriting, and it's a letter. It's what's called a verse letter. Okay. All right, we'll stop there. We'll do Donne on Thursday. I think we can still do everybody else on Tuesday of next week.
So in terms of